Hello ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be reviewing rewriting trig expressions in fractional form. So here are some tips that we talked about in class. The first two we talked about in class. The third one came up as I was working on some problems and saw a student try a trick, and it seems to work for almost all the problems we've done, so far. So I'm going to share that with you as well. So our first tip was to get a difference of squares in the denominator of our fraction. We want to do that so we can use a Pythagorean identity to simplify the denominator. So the nice thing about when we use the identity to simplify the denominator, and as a Pythagorean identity, we're always going to have something squared in the bottom, or we're just going to have 1 in the bottom. So if that's the case, if we have something squared in the bottom, we can try moving the denominator to the top by using an inverse trig function. So if that doesn't make 100% sense to you now, that's fine. We'll do an example so I can show you what that looks like. So we're going to be practicing this technique with this example below, 1 over 1 plus sine x. So I'm going to ask you guys to pause the video and give it a shot first yourselves, and then when you're ready, come back and join us and see if you did it the same way as I did, and if you did it a different way, go ahead and do that as well. So go ahead and press pause and then we'll move on. Alright, so our example was 1 over 1 plus sine x. And I'm going to put our tips and tricks in here as well, just in the bottom, so we can refer to these as we go through here. So our first tip was to get a difference of squares in the denominator. So to do that, I'm going to multiply the denominator by 1 minus sine x. But remember, our goal here is to simplify, or to get it out of fractional form, not to change the value. So we're going to have to multiply the top by 1 minus sine x2 in order to make sure we don't change the value of the expression. So we have 1 minus sine x over 1 minus sine x. That's the same thing as multiplying by 1. And then we get in, then when we multiply that out, we get 1 minus sine x in the numerator, and then 1 minus sine x squared in the denominator. So if you had trouble seeing where the 1 minus sine x squared comes from, that's from when we were doing difference of squares, or reviewing that in our table groups on Tuesday and Wednesday. So just like when we had in our table groups, we started with something like this where we had a difference of two squares, and then we factored it out into these two. So now we're just doing the reverse. We're given these two factors, and then we're multiplying together to get a difference of squares. If you can't remember that, go ahead and FOIL it out. So we'd have 1 times 1 equals 1. Then our inner would be sine times 1, which is 1, times 1 times negative sine, which is negative sine. Those two will cancel. And then you'll have sine times negative sine, which gives you negative sine squared x. So that's how that comes about. So go ahead and review that if you need to. So next, we're going to move on to tip number 2, which is use a Pythagorean identity. So go ahead and take a look at your Pythagorean identity sheets and see which one you should use. Now, only one of them should look familiar, or should seem obvious, and that's because only one of them has a sine squared in it. So I'm going to take a look at that one. So it's going to be sine squared x plus cosine squared x equals 1. Now here I can see I can subtract away a sine squared from both sides, and then I'm going to have exactly what I need. So if I subtract out sine squared from both sides, I get cosine squared x equals 1 minus sine squared x. Now I can plug in cosine squared x into 1 minus sine squared x. So when I do that, I get 1 minus sine on the top, 1 minus sine x on the numerator, and my denominator becomes cosine squared x. Now I'm going to rewrite this horizontally because I think it might help us see what's going to cancel here. So if I rewrite this horizontally, I get 1 minus sine x divided by 1 over cosine squared x. Now we saw this several times today when we're dividing by a fraction. That's the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So that means this is the same as 1 minus sine x times cosine squared x. And we got that because we changed our division sign to multiplication sign and then flip-flopped the numerator and the denominator of 1 over cosine squared x. So now we just have cosine squared x over 1, which is just cosine squared x. So then this here is no longer in fractional form, and we're done. Now we could distribute out the cosine squared x and see if we could get anything to cancel. So if the direction said write so it's not a fraction and simplify, that's something we might consider to do. But if the directions just say write so it's no longer a fraction, we are done here. So as you're going through some example problems, try to go through your notes and see if you can find where we did these 3 tips in all our problems. See if you can use these tips in your problems, or if you have a different way that works better for you, go ahead and move forward with that as well. Leave some notes in the comments if you have a certain point that you're always getting stuck at, if it's figuring out how you get to the difference of squares here, or maybe it's trying to figure out what's the right Pythagorean identity to use, or maybe it's what comes after that, because that might be the case too. So good luck, and we will see you later.